This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management topics to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at www.thepmpodcast.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com.
Hello and welcome to episode number 111, Overtime. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast for the 26th of December 2008. Nice to have you with us. This episode of the Project Management Podcast is a premium episode, and normally it is created and recorded especially for the subscribers of the Premium Project Management Podcast. However, because this is the first of many presentation-style episodes that I'm planning to create, I'm making this episode available to everyone. That way you can see what it is that you would get with a subscription to our Premium version. All right, let's get the show rolling. As you have seen, the title of today's episode is that there is no PMI or PMBOK guide project management methodology. And if you go to a PMI dinner meeting or you talk to colleagues from other companies, you may sometimes hear them say things like, we use the PMI methodology, or we are following the PMBOK guide to manage our projects, or we just implemented the PMBOK guide as our project management methodology. Well, if you hear that, you should start worrying, because that pretty much means that these people do not really understand that there is no such thing as a methodology from the PMI or the PMBOK guide. And that's what we want to delve in today and explain a little bit more what that exactly means. Let's start, however, with a couple of facts about the PMBOK guide. First of all, the word PMBOK itself, PMBOK, that was coined by Max Weidman in the early 1980s. Max is probably one of the most respected project managers here in the United States of America, and if I'm not mistaken, he single-handedly wrote the first version of the PMBOK guide. I think he did have a few collaborators there, but most of the work in the first edition came from him. And PMBOK stands for the Project Management Body of Knowledge. And of course, the image that you see here, yes, that is Max Weidman. If you want a really good website with a lot of reference materials, then, well, of course, you first go to thepmpodcast.com, as you would, and you visit our show website. But maxweidman.com is also a very good website with a ton of free reference material. Probably my favorite website that I go to when I need reference materials at all. Also, the new PMBOK guide 4th edition will be available on December 31st, 2008. It is my understanding it is an ANSI standard, so they have to update it every 4 years, and they're just squeezing it in there on December 31st of this year. So, what is the PMBOK guide? Well, the PMBOK guide is not a blueprint for managing your projects. It also doesn't give you a clearly defined project lifecycle. It talks a little bit about what project life cycles are, but it doesn't go into the details at all. It also doesn't include any project management processes at all. There are no templates in the PMBOK guide, so nothing that as a project manager you could fill in. It is a consensus of what project management in general entails. Okay, some people would say it's a compromise because so many people have worked on this thing, but let me not minimize here the work that all these people have done, of course. It is a consensus, it is a good consensus, it is, well, the body of knowledge, a guide to the knowledge that we have about project management. It is about 400 pages long, and like I said, it is an ANSI standard, and it costs you around $35. At least the 3rd edition did. I haven't yet looked up what the 4th edition costs, and unfortunately, it will put you to sleep. It is a very dry read. It is not something that you would want to, take on an island and really entertain yourself with there on the lonely island. That's not the book that you would want to take. It is a scholarly book. Even the PMBOK guide tells us that I am not a methodology. Here is what it says. The knowledge and practices described in the PMBOK guide, they are applicable to most projects most of the time, and that there is consensus about the value and usefulness of the information that you find in the PMBOK guide, but it's definitely not a methodology. It goes on to say that the first paragraph here, that does not mean that the knowledge described should always be applied uniformly. So don't just take the PMBOK guide and just apply it to every single project in the organization. The project management team or the organization is responsible for determining what is appropriate for any given project. So don't just say we're using the PMBOK guide on everything that we do in our company. All right, so that's what the PMBOK guide wasn't really doing. So what does the PMBOK guide offer then? Has to be the next question. Well, it offers building blocks for project management, kind of like Legos almost. You take this, you take that, you take the other, you put it together into your project management methodology. It offers best practices. Like we've seen in the previous slide, there is consensus about the value of the information in the PMBOK guide. So those are best practices that we have used again and again on projects. Tools and techniques. The PMBOK guide is full of tools and techniques. The third edition had 44 processes. The fourth edition, I believe, out of the top of my head, I think it's 42 processes. And in each process, the PMBOK guide describes tools and techniques that you could use to create a work breakdown structure or do your risk assessment, etc. So there is a ton of information in regards to tools and techniques in the PMBOK guide. It also offers containers, and it calls those the process groups. There are 5 of them, and it calls them the knowledge areas. There are 9 of those. The process groups, we all know them. It's whatever you do, what you do in a project on a standard plan. It's initiating a project, you're planning a project, you're executing a project, you're monitoring and controlling a project, and you're closing a project. Now, these process groups should not be looked at as phases in a project, like the design phase or build phase or rollout phase. Those are totally different, right? We're talking about process groups. And then there are the 9 knowledge areas like scope management, time management, human resources, communications, procurement, risk, you name it. There are 9 of those where we combine the information of the specific area of HR. So what is it that we do in human resources management on a project? These are grouped into these 9 knowledge areas. Okay. Furthermore, in the PMBOK guide, there is no prescriptive detail. It is at a very high level. It doesn't go down into the details and really talk about everything that you would need on a project management methodology in order to make it work. It is truly a reference manual for project management. It includes a description of the concepts, the terms, the tools, the techniques, the language, the vocabulary, abbreviations. That's what you will find in the PMBOK guide. And here's the good thing. The 4th edition, that's the one that's coming out on the 31st of December, clearly states, as a foundational reference, this standard is neither complete nor all-inclusive. This standard is a guide rather than a methodology. Again, this standard is a guide rather than a methodology. One can use different methodologies and tools to implement the framework. So it calls itself a guide, And then it goes on by saying that you can use different methodologies and tools to implement the framework that we are presenting on these pages here. So there's a clear statement now in the 4th edition. Hey, I'm not a methodology. Don't call me a methodology. All right. So what then is the difference, visually speaking, between a project management framework and a project management methodology? Here we have a framework that I have copied from the MIT.edu website, and it follows pretty much what we have heard already from the PMBOK guide. We have an initiation process group that starts on the left, and it continues to prepare, it goes over to execute and control, and then there is a closing group within this particular framework. As you can see here on this graphic, it doesn't go much into detail. It's really high level. It pretty much just tells you, well, generally speaking, this is how we manage a project. Now let's take a look at a project management methodology. This one here I have taken from Global Access LLC. That's the project management methodology that they are using when they are working with clients. As you can see, there's already a lot more detail here on this page, and it really is a more complete description of how you manage a project. Well, because it is the methodology. It talks about design, it talks about coding, and we talk about status reviews. Even project management itself is only one of the 8 bullets, one of the 8 oval shapes that you see in the top half of the screen. Now let's pull down here to the bottom right there, the 6th of those blocks at the bottom, and take a look at what it says here, because here we're really getting into the details. We're talking about the implementation and execution of the project. And look at what the second bullet says. It says on-site demo. Well, if you look through the PMBOK guide doesn't tell you that you should have an on-site demo. No, that is a methodology, that is an approach, that is a best practice that we have in our company, that we do an on-site demo with the customer. The PMBOK guide just gives you the framework of how to manage your project. The on-site demo, that is now part of the details in the methodology that we use. All right. Let's jump a little bit more into the depth here of what phases of a project could be. Here I'm showing you the possible phases of a web project. Remember, in the PMBOK guide we had initiation, planning, executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Those were the 5 process groups. And here we now have 6 possible phases of a web project. It starts with the project definition, then we have information architecture, goes on to design, production, integration and launching, and then it goes into maintenance as the 6th phase of a project. Well, you could argue maintenance not really part of the project. This should probably not be included in here. Okay, I can live with that. So integration and launching is probably the last phase of the project, and then there is a handover into maintenance into the future. All right, so these are 6 possible phases for a web project. Now let's jump a little bit deeper here. Let's look at the actual activities that we would find in the first of these 6 phases, project definition. These activities, they are defined by and they are tailored by the performing organization. And performing organization, by the way, that's a PMI-ism. That pretty much means the performing organization, that's the company that executes this project here, that pays for the project. So the steps here, the activities here, these are tailored to the needs of our company as we are managing this web project. Let's look at them a little bit. Okay, so it starts out with we have to complete a project charter, because without a project charter we shouldn't be managing a project, right? Then we have to define funding requirements. That's part of what we do in our company on this particular project here. If we compare these two to the PMBOK guide, you will see that the PMBOK guide talks about the project charter. It talks about funding requirements and funding requirement reconciliation and all these kind of things. But here, our activities, in our methodology, we would probably go much more into detail. We would go into having a template for the project charter. We would also have probably some kind of a budget Excel file in which you could enter your funding requirements. Let's move on. Next, you have to get the sign-off from the sponsor, from finance, from the customer. The difference here definitely is this, that we are specifically calling out the people from whom we require sign-off: sponsor, finance, customer. Okay, these are just 3 examples. The PMBOK guide does not go into detail and explaining who has to sign off. It just says someone has to sign off on this. Next, we have to hold a kick-off meeting. The PMBOK guide does not discuss this at all, although it is a best practice for most people that at the beginning of a project we hold a kick-off meeting. That is part of our methodology, and a clear difference between the PMBOK guide framework and the methodology that we are implementing here at our company, at our fictitious company, of course, where we manage this web project. Then, we have to write an article for our company newsletter, because it is important that everyone in our company is aware that we have this new project that just started. You will definitely not find this in the PMBOK guide. This is something very specific to our internal methodology, and so on. So there will be dozen more activities that we have to take care of during the project definition phase of our new project that we are rolling out here in our company. Okay, so the question now is then, well, how do we get from the PMBOK guide to a actual methodology? Well, it starts at the bottom. Like I said, you take the PMBOK guide framework and you build everything on top of that. I'm trying to make this easy here. I'm not trying to go into the details. I'm not trying to be complete. Let's just start at the bottom from the PMBOK guide framework and begin adding on top of this the components that make sense in order to build a methodology. Now, if you really want to do this, you have to go much more into detail and be more specific. This is really just to give you an understanding of what it would be that needs to be done in order to build such a methodology that's based on the PMBOK guide. Okay, on top of that, we add processes, we add practices, like the ones that we have just seen in our fictitious project on the previous slide here. And how do we define these processes and these practices? Well, we use SOPs, standard operating procedures, in which we define what it is that we have to do. We use templates. Well, every project manager has seen at least one template in their life, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So there will be a series of templates that we have to fill in for our particular project, and we have a ton of policies. You know, like for instance, expense policies on a project, or hiring policies for specific groups of people that work on our project. So this is how we define the processes, the practices, more in detail for our particular project. Well, but that's definitely not all. There are a ton more areas that we're going to have to discuss. We're talking metrics, phases, training, budget, people, repositories, schedule, communication, you name it. All of these areas of concern need to be addressed in a methodology that we are building based on the PMBOK guide framework. So now you see that the framework is really, the PMBOK guide is really just the foundation of this. It gives you a basic, a central starting point from where you can build on top of and create your own methodology. Well, you don't really have to do this because there are companies out there who have done this for you. Here are just 3 examples of PMBOK-based methodologies that I personally know of. Of course, the first one you may have heard of, 10-Step. I believe they've been a sponsor of our program before. You can find them at 10step.com. Then we have MetoCube at metocube.com, and the PMBOK from PM Solutions. I believe we mentioned these in a previous overtime episode, at least the PMBOK in a previous episode when we were reviewing 10 other project management methodologies. I think PM Solutions we already mentioned earlier there. And yes, these methodologies, they contain the detailed processes, best practices, templates, recommendations for managing your project, etc., etc., etc. Everything that we have looked at on the previous slide is included in these methodologies. Of course, each one of these 3 methodologies will have a different angle. They will have different assumptions, how they built it and from where they started. But you will be able to see the PMBOK guide shine through these methodologies as a foundation of where they were built from. All right. Let's take a little bit of a sidestep here. I found 2 items in preparing today's episode that I found interesting. This one here, very interesting. It says that most project management methodologies will either be based on the material found in the PMBOK guide or will compare itself to the PMBOK guide. For instance, we are different than the PMBOK methodology because, well, first of all, it's totally wrong to say we are different than the PMBOK methodology because we've just learned it's not a methodology. But what I'm trying to say here is this. I think this statement is wrong. So what about the other frameworks that are out there? What about Prince2? What about CMM? What about ISO? There are a number of project management standards and frameworks out there based on which you can build your project management methodology. If this statement here would say most project management methodologies in North America will either be based on the material, etc., etc., then I would agree, because in North America, United States, Canada, I'm not sure about Mexico, I assume it is also very much PMBOK focused. So at least in the United States and Canada, I can speak for that. The PMBOK guide is king when it comes to project management frameworks. So this statement here would be correct, but not worldwide. I found this on suite101.com. Another interesting side note here is the question, everyone at this point is talking about agile and lean methodologies. Is agile compatible with the PMBOK guide? I found a presentation by Alan S. Koch, and what he says is, in his verdict, nothing in the agile methodologies is incompatible with the PMBOK processes. He says that what you can do, what may be advisable, is augmenting your agile methodologies with some PMBOK guide processes. But you should only do this where it is really needed, and most importantly, do not compromise the agility of your method. The PMBOK guide is not very agile. The PMBOK guide is, you could say, waterfall focused. Okay, I'm going out on a limb here. It's not really true, but it's a possible statement. The PMBOK guide is a real heavy piece of a framework, and agile and lean, they're really trying to put away with all this heavy stuff on the side. So when you augment your agile methodology with some PMBOK processes, make sure that you do not lose your agility of your agile method that you have. You can find the complete presentation here by Alan, of course, in the helpful resources section of the Project Management Podcast at thepmpodcast.com. Just click on the helpful resources link that you will find in today's episode, and that's episode 111, Overtime. Okay, let's close this out here. We have seen that the PMBOK guide is not a methodology, it is a framework. Let's finish up with looking at the big differences, the major differences between a framework on the left here and a methodology on the right. I would say that a framework is the what of project management. It gives you the basic conceptual structure that you are using when you are addressing complex issues such as are given to you in a project, and it only outlines possible courses of action. Yes, not the specific courses of action. Well, you could do this, you could do that. Remember I said the PMBOK guide has a ton of tools and techniques in it? Well, it has a ton of tools and techniques in every single process. You don't have to use them all. They are complementary. You can use one or the other to end up with the same kind of result. Okay, so that's the framework on the left. Now the methodology. From my point of view, the methodology discusses the how of project management. How are we doing it specifically? It gives you the particular procedure or the particular set of procedures required in order to really execute your project. And also the methodology is the rationale and the assumptions that underlie a particular approach. So why are we doing this? We're doing this because our company policies require us to do. So all of these the organizational influences that you have in your company, they are going to go into your methodology, and you will not find that in a framework such as the PMBOK guide. Well, and that's it for today. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much also for watching. As always, you can find us on the web at thepmpodcast.com. And if you are a project manager who wants to become a PMP, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcast, the PM Prepcast, and study for the exam by listening to over 90 podcast episodes from PMPrepcast.com. And if you are already PMP certified, then please stop by at pmlectures.com, where we go beyond just delivering PDUs. We give you exclusive training from the brightest minds in project management today. Please send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com, and yes, when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. We build systems like the Wright brothers build airplanes. Build the whole thing, push it off a cliff, let it crash, and start all over again. Until next time.